When you think like an athlete, setbacks don't stop you. But mindset alone doesn't get you moving again. That's where Icy Hot steps in. Ice works fast. Heat makes it last. So when the rest of the world settles because of a setback, Icy Hot accelerates your comeback with fast-acting, powerful pain relief. Icy Hot. You're so back.
Hello.
Look what TJ Maxx dragged in.
The Devil Wears Prada 2 is now streaming on Disney Plus and Hulu.
We are digital, we are downloadable, we are streamable.
The fashion event of the year is certified fresh.
Pull yourself together. We have work to do.
Critics say it's smart and witty and the perfect sequel.
That's all.
Get runway ready for The Devil Wears Prada 2 on Disney Plus and Hulu. Rated PG-13.
Okay, quick confession before we get into anything else. I had never heard of Jade Oshibaru before this week. Didn't know her face, didn't know her work. I even looked up how to accurately pronounce her name. Then I saw a picture of her and just, well, she's gorgeous. That's it. That's all I thought. I'm not going to pretend I didn't have it. But that is genuinely not why we're here. We're here because she posted something on the internet that made me put my coffee down mid-sip and go, oh, I think we better do this episode today. She basically asked whether shows like this one are replacing therapy. And I have thoughts, of course. And, what do I do with those thoughts? I speak them into a microphone and you listen if you choose to. So let's get into it.
You're listening to Unbound, off script. No outlines, no safety nets, just Beth Curry talking about whatever the hell she wants or whatever the hell you've asked her to uncover. It's unfiltered, it's unpredictable, and it's officially started. Pull up a chair and don't expect her to stop talking anytime soon. She's a total blabbermouth. Take it away, Beth.
Hey everybody, welcome back to Unbound, show where I take things a little too seriously and then immediately undercut it with a joke because that's the only way I know how to survive being a person. Usually I try to keep it light around here. Sometimes I throw psychology into like every damn possible episode I can, even if it doesn't really apply because, my obsession with psychology and human behavior and all that fun stuff. Today, though, I want to dip a little bit deeper than usual. I don't think the humor will disappear. I'll just throw it in when I feel it's necessary. So here's the plan. First, I want to walk through what Jade actually said because the headlines flattened it, I think. And the original point is more interesting than the outrage cycle it may create or may have created. Second, I'm going to tell you something about myself that I obviously have talked about before on this show. And third, I'm going to gently and respectfully push back a little bit on part of what she said while agreeing with the part that actually matters. Okay? So I think we're going to land somewhere that I think, is a lot more useful than podcast good or podcast bad. Okay? So quick context on who Jade is. Because I went in knowing basically nothing. She's a Nigerian filmmaker. That's really the whole extent of what I need to know here. And honestly, it's not the point. I'm not big on getting starry-eyed over anyone's resume, hers included. What matters, though, is what she said, not really her IMDb page. Here's what happened. She had a podcast playing in the background while she worked, right? The way that you or I might have a true crime show murmuring in the kitchen. I don't know. Kind of maybe like what you are doing right now. I don't know. And for about an hour, she found herself kind of half listening to a woman recount in tears the most painful parts of her marriage and divorce and being comforted by the host as she went. And her reaction wasn't, turn it off, this is gross. Her reaction was more complicated than that. She said she felt real sympathy for the guest, but she also couldn't shake like this bigger culture level worry that we're slowly swapping out actual community and actual therapy for the specific high of publicly naming the people who hurt us and collecting public sympathy for it. Okay, so that's roughly her words, not mine. I think it's worth sitting on instead of dunking on. So my favorite part, though, the part nobody's quoting in the recap article, she followed it up by saying she genuinely wonders whether people who go on these podcasts actually find healing from it. Not, I know they don't. Not, this is exploiting people and it's just gross. It's just like a real question. Does it work? And I want to be extremely clear about something before I go any further, okay? I don't think she's wrong to ask that question. I think it's a damn good question, actually. I just don't think the honest answer is a single word, right? It's not yes across the board, and it's not no across the board either. It depends enormously on why someone is doing it and who's holding space for them while they do, and what happens after the mic turns off. She said one more thing that I keep coming back to as well. She wondered if there's a thin line between speaking your truth and just wanting to hurt whoever hurts you. And I don't think that's a cynical thing to say. I think it's an honest thing to say, because that line is thin sometimes. I've heard episodes where I couldn't tell if the guest was healing or just reloading. Right? Where the host's job maybe seemed to be less hold this person and more keep them talking long enough to get a viral clip out of it. I think it's disgusting. I don't try to do that here. I don't go for shock. I don't go for awe. I don't go for, oh, please, dear God, can my podcast like go viral and can I become like stupid famous and blah, blah. No. That version, though, of this genre absolutely exists, and it's fair to be uneasy about it. Okay. I'd be uneasy about it too, if that's the only version I'd ever encountered. But I don't think you can look at that thin line and like conclude that the whole genre is suspect any more than you'd conclude therapy is suspect, because some therapists are shitty at their jobs, which conveniently is exactly what I want to talk about next, using myself as the test case because I have a uniquely intense answer to, does this actually help? So a quick palate cleanser before we go there, because I promised you some light humor and I'm a woman of my word. The sheer number of people I know personally who now have a podcast is deeply alarming. Even when I had one, when I announced it, I said in, a move of complete originality, I was being sarcastic, obviously. I know who a podcast. It's, my cousin has a podcast. My dentist has a podcast. I'm fairly sure my dentist's podcast is about my cousin's podcast. I don't know. We have collectively decided that the correct response to any human feeling is, and that's on today's episode. I'm not exempt from the bit. I am the whole bit. Okay. So I've been on, open on the show and other podcasts that I've been on before about having gone through therapy and about how much active ongoing work healing has taken for me. Not necessarily a single breakthrough moment, not a montage, just kind of those years of the gross, repetitive, sometimes boring effort. Therapy's been essential. I've also talked about how it was 9D breath work that moved the needle where a decade of therapy didn't. And not just the breath work, but at the same time, telling my story here on the podcast. I want to say that therapy has been essential up front so that nobody here's what's coming next as I quit therapy and did a podcast instead, because that's not the story. The story is that the therapy did something crucial in some way. And then this show and the breath work, like talking to you out loud on purpose, did something different. And honestly, I'd say additional, if that makes sense. It wasn't a replacement, just a second tool that worked on a part of me that the first tool couldn't quite reach, right? The difference is best I can describe it. Therapy, I've said this before, you're sitting in a room with someone and you're just rehashing details. You're speaking what happens to you over and over again. And it's just repetitive and it's I don't know, it's so hard to describe. And this is why I say 9D helped me, because I was actually able to feel things and think about things instead of speaking the things, because it was quiet while I was doing it, right? Hard to explain. You'll have to listen to previous episodes to kind of get a better idea about that. But therapy is a room with one other person in it, someone trained to hold what you hand them, right? And that containment is exactly what makes it safe and exactly what makes it limited in a specific way. It stays in that room. So what happened when I started unloading my actual story on this podcast was something else entirely. It stopped being a secret I was managing. I was holding this for decades. Some people didn't even know these things about me. Okay. It stopped being something I had to strategize around. Who knows, who doesn't, who I have to carefully steer conversations away from at Christmas. I said the true thing in my actual voice to whoever wanted to listen. And I have never felt anything close to that particular kind of relief anywhere else. Not from journaling, not from a really good cry in a Target parking lot, though I recommend that too, free of charge. That was different. This was the truth stopping being a weight that I carried alone in a room and becoming like just a fact about my life that existed in the world now, whether anyone was comfortable with it or not. Make sense? Was it healing? Yes. Genuinely, structurally, measurably, yes. In a way I can point to a before and after for. I remember the actual physical experience of recording the first few episodes, where I said any of it out loud. My hands were shaking and I had to put my notes down, the book, because I was reading from the book. The pages were making noise against the mic. I'd rehearsed it in my car, in the shower, to my cat, who was a wonderful listener, and she never once judged me, which honestly puts her ahead of several humans I know. And even with all of that, like rehearsal, the second I actually said the real sentence out loud, through the mic to be heard, something kind of cracked open in my chest that all that private rehearsal in the world hadn't really touched, right? And that's the part I don't think you can replicate in a therapist's office. Not because therapy doesn't work, but because like a locked room and an open mic are just structurally different experiences. One is contained and the other is witnessed. And as it turns out, I needed both. And I didn't know that until I'd done it. Was it also terrifying? Also, yes. So let's talk about that part, because I think it's the part Jade's tweet is actually circling. Like, even if the discourse turned it into a referendum on whether trauma podcasts are good or bad. So here's a joke to buy myself a second, because I need one. Nothing prepares you for this horror of hitting publish on an episode where you cried and then 40 minutes later running into your barista who says, "Loved the new episode," with the exact same energy she uses to compliment your oat milk order. There is no algorithm on earth that tells you how to respond to that, right? Like, I have tried several, none have worked. I usually just say thank you and leave with my coffee, like a woman fleeing a crime scene or something. But the part I said I'd tell you straight, no jokes, because it deserves that. Some of what happened after I started speaking openly about my story was strange in ways I genuinely didn't see coming. And I did an episode about this, like a whole episode. I gave it a whole 25 minutes. People I'd known for years, like not casual acquaintances, people I considered close, people who asked for my story in their hands, people who wanted to hear it, heard it, and then just went quiet. They stopped talking to me. They stopped texting back. They found reasons to be busy. Nobody ever really told me why. And I kind of covered it in the episode because I went pretty deep psychologically, just for my own well-being and for anyone listening to understand kind of why people do that. And I've had to make peace with never getting an explanation for the ones who disappeared. It's okay. And then there was a different, stranger reaction for people who did stick around. Some of them wanted to correct me on how I was allowed to feel about my own life. More specifically, and more commonly, about forgiveness. Because, my story, the one I've told on this show, the man who raped me is also the man who killed my son, and I have forgiven him. I want to say that clearly for the record, because I know how this can be misheard. I'm not naming him publicly. I did use his first name. There have been people in my past who actually figured out who it was because they knew, they saw me with him in high school and stuff. But I'm not doing that now. I'm not naming him fully in my books or in my podcast episodes or anything. I'm not running a campaign. I'm not asking anyone to feel a certain way about him at all. This isn't slander, and it was never meant to hurt him or anyone connected to him. It's just what happened to me, and it's mine to carry and mine to speak about whenever and however I want to, right? What I wasn't prepared for, though, was how many people needed me to be angrier than I was. And believe me, I spent a fair amount of time being very, very angry. Like, it impacted my life. I had people close to me, essentially scold me for forgiving him, as if my forgiveness was a betrayal of my son. As if maybe grief only counts if it curdles into some sort of permanent rage, and anything else means maybe I didn't love him enough, or I didn't take what happened seriously enough. Like, I want to gently push back on that, like right here and out loud. Forgiveness didn't cost my son anything. Okay? It didn't erase what happened. It didn't excuse it. And it sure as anything didn't make me forget him. At all. It was the only way I found to stop that day from owning every single day that came after it. That's it. That's the whole reason. It was for me. It was never a referendum on how much I loved him. I've thought a lot about why my forgiveness bothered people more than my grief ever did. I don't think it's because they're bad people. I think a lot of us grow up with just like one script for what surviving something unspeakable is supposed to look like, right? You get to be devastated and you get to be furious. And if you're strong, eventually you get to be at peace. But peace is supposed to arrive quietly and privately in these situations. And it's definitely not supposed to include the word forgiveness anywhere near the person who hurt you. And I broke the script. And I'm glad. And I don't give a shit. I broke the script. And I think when people watch someone break a script they've always trusted, it can feel less like witnessing someone else's healing and more like, I've said, being handed a mirror that they didn't ask for. Some of the anger directed at me, I've come to believe, was never really about me at all, right? And I'll be honest with you, sharing that on a podcast of all places felt insane the first time I did it. It still feels a little insane now. But it's also, without exaggeration, the single most healing thing I've ever done, more than any individual year of therapy, more than time, more than anything anyone said to comfort me. Saying it out loud, right? To strangers, stripped it of the power it had when it only existed as a thing I managed quietly in my own head. And this brings me back to Jade and the question she actually asked, the good one. Does this actually help the people who do it? For me, unambiguously, yes. I can't speak for the woman crying on that podcast she overheard. I don't know her story, her host, her reasons, or what happens for her tomorrow when the episode's live and her ex's cousin has thoughts. I don't know. I know what it did for me, and I refuse to let a valid, well-meaning cultural question turn into a blanket rule that survivors should keep quiet because strangers online might find it uncomfortable, or because someone I love decided forgiveness was wrong. The wrong response to my grief. Now, in the interest of actually being fair, because I think that matters more than winning an argument with a tweet, I wanted to defend Jade a little. Because I think there's a real worthwhile point buried under the discourse that kind of ate it alive, right? She's drawing a line between two things that can look identical from the outside, but are completely different on the inside. Sharing your story to heal versus using an audience to punish someone who hurt you and farm sympathy off the wreckage. That second thing is real. It happens. Not every trauma story on a microphone is healthy for the person telling it, and not every host holding space for a crying guest is doing it out of genuine care rather than good numbers, right? I think she's right to name that there's a version of this that's exploitative and a version that replaces the harder, slower work of therapy and real community with a public performance of processing that never actually lands anywhere. I just don't think the fix is fewer people speaking, right? I think the fix, like the actual boring, unsatisfying fix, is nothing more complicated than choice on both ends. The person telling the story gets to decide if this helps them, and the person on the other side of the mic gets to decide if they want to listen, right? If it's useful to anyone, here's the informal, entirely unlicensed checklist I actually run through before I open up about anything heavy on the show, because I do think there's a real difference between processing and performing. And I'd rather be honest about where that line sits for me than pretend it doesn't even exist. So 1, am I telling this because it's costing me something to carry it quietly? Or has that cost already been paid off somewhere else, like in therapy, and I'm just chasing a reaction now? 2, could I tell this exact story to one trusted friend privately and feel the same relief? Or is the relief actually coming from the size of the audience? And if it's the second one, I think that's worth being honest with myself about, right? I've never encountered that, but, that's the case. And 3, am I okay if the person listening feels nothing or needs the reaction to be big to feel like it worked? I don't always pass all 3 questions perfectly. Nobody does, but asking them keeps me on the healing side of Jade's thin line more often than not, right? Because the thing that nobody in this whole discourse seems to be saying or understanding, you do not owe anyone your ears. If a podcast episode about someone's divorce or someone's assault or someone's grief isn't something you want in your head today or ever, you are completely 100% allowed to not listen, right? You can scroll on past. You can turn it off. You don't need a reason. And I don't know, you definitely don't owe the person who made it an explanation. To be fair to Jade, one more time before I let this go. She never actually said the crying woman on the podcast wasn't allowed to speak. She didn't say that at all. She said she didn't know if it was helping her. I don't know either. Neither does anyone reading that thread or retweeting it or writing a headline about it or reading an article about it. That's kind of the whole problem with turning someone's private process into, again, I'm going to use this word, referendum. None of us actually have the information to judge it either way. I don't get a vote on whether that stranger's healing is real, and neither does Twitter, and neither, frankly, does Jade, right? However good her question was. And I mean that about my own show too. Genuinely, some of the people closest to me in my actual life have never listened to the episode where I told my story. They didn't listen to the season. Many haven't even listened to my podcast once. Not one time. And I want to be really clear. That's completely fine. That's their business, not mine. I don't know if it's too heavy for them, or if it's easier for them to love me without picturing everything in detail, or if they just haven't gotten around to it between work and laundry and their own lives. I'm not entitled to know. It costs me nothing. It takes nothing away from what sharing it did for me. So maybe that's the actual answer to Jade's question. The one buried under the headline. It's not, should people stop telling these stories? It's everyone gets to choose their own role in this. Speak if it helps you and only if it helps you. Listen if you want to, walk away if you need to. And none of those choices require anyone else's permission or explanation, right? Quick lighter thought to close this show. If you're one of the people who has never listened to my heaviest episode, no judgment, truly. But if you have listened to it and you still, to this day, text me forwarded motivational quotes about letting go, like I haven't already done the single hardest version of that available to a human being, I see you and I love you, truly. And please stop doing that. Real quick, because I promised you this show would stay lighter than the episode has mostly been, I do want to acknowledge the absurdity of the fact that this entire conversation was sparked by someone half listening to a podcast while doing unrelated work, which is genuinely how I consume 90% of my true crime content too. I have folded laundry to a woman describing her divorce. I've made dinner to a man describing his bankruptcy. I've unloaded groceries to someone's entire testimony about a cult. We're all just background noise witnesses to each other's healing now. And honestly, as a species, that might be the real headline, right? Not whether it's replacing therapy. So, where does that leave us? Jade asked a real question. Maybe kind of started to look like a hot take when the media picked it up. I think that the real question deserves better than the discourse it got. Is public sharing sometimes a stand-in for the harder work of therapy and community? Sure, sometimes for some people. Is it also, for other people, for me, one of the most genuinely healing things available? Something therapy alone didn't fully reach? Also, yes. As I love to say, both things are true. Both things can be true. I don't think either of us has to be wrong for the other to be right. Here's what I'll leave you with today. If you take one thing from this episode, you're allowed to speak your truth even when it scares people, okay? You're allowed to forgive even when other people think your grief owes them a different ending. And you're allowed to not listen to a single word of any of this if it's not what you need today. No explanation required, no hard feelings, no follow-up questions. That goes for strangers on the internet, and it goes for the people who love me the most too. Thank you for listening to this episode, if you did. I will see you next time.
And that brings us to the end of another episode of Unbound Off Script. Someone eventually had to pull the plug because, as you know, Beth will happily keep talking until the sun goes down. Thanks for listening, and we will see you whenever she finally runs out of things to say. I'm Rob, she's a blabbermouth, and we're out.